And now we come to the heavyweights, over 200 pounds.
This is the story of a rivalry so intense it changed bodybuilding forever. One man was the king, a six-time Mr. Olympia who ruled every room he entered and never feared a challenger. The other was a silent giant, so physically overwhelming that even the king admitted he was different.
He's equally as good as I am, or if let's say he's a few percent better as I am.
Two bodies the sport had never seen before, one crown, and a result far closer than history remembers. The boy who should never have become a giant.
Come on, you're gonna do it! Come on!
Lou Ferrigno, the man whose story began far from the spotlight. Starting off at a disadvantage, within months of his birth he developed a series of severe ear infections that destroyed between 75 and 80% of his hearing. However, nobody noticed at first because he was an infant who could not tell anyone the world was going quiet. By the time he was 3 years old, the damage was permanent. His parents took him to doctors, who delivered news that felt like a sentence. Their son has significant hearing loss and will need hearing aids for the rest of his life. In the 1950s, those hearing aids were thick straps wrapped across the chest, with wires running to heavy plastic molds shoved into the ears. And the audio quality was poor enough that words came through as muffled shapes rather than clean signals. He wore this equipment to school every day, and every day the other children noticed. They called him Deaf Louie, Deaf Mute, and Freak, and they punched him in the chest deliberately, aiming for the hearing aid strap and trying to break the equipment. When he came home and told his father what happened, he did not receive comfort. His father, Matty Ferrigno, was a New York City police lieutenant who believed the only way to survive hardship was to become harder. He hit Lou again and told him not to come home unless he could fight for himself. Lou has repeated this story in interviews across 5 decades, and every time the details are exactly the same.
I got a beating. I went home, I cried to him. He gave me another beating. He said, don't ever come home again if you can't fight for yourself.
The specificity never fades. He was failing on 2 fronts simultaneously: at school by his peers, and at home by the person who was supposed to be his shield. What a child does with that kind of sustained pressure tells you everything about who they become as an adult. Lou turned inward and started reading comic books, particularly The Incredible Hulk, a story about a gentleman who transforms into an unstoppable giant when provoked. He became obsessed, not because he wanted to smash things, but because the Hulk could not be hurt. In his own words, spoken decades later, "I was obsessed with power. I wanted to be strong enough so that I could defend myself." At 13, he decided to build that power with his own hands. He had no money for equipment and could not ask his father for anything, so he took a broomstick from his mother's kitchen, found empty paint cans in a junkyard, filled them with wet cement and waited for them to harden before threading the broomstick through. That was his first barbell. On the floor of a Brooklyn apartment with scavenged materials, one of the most extraordinary physiques in the history of sport began to take shape. The ascent of a silent killer. Lou attended Brooklyn Technical High School, where he studied metalworking and sheet metal fabrication. He was learning how to shape metal at the same time he was learning how to shape his body. And the instincts he developed in that workshop, precision, patience, and the understanding of how structure supports mass, translated directly into how he approached building his physique. He graduated in 1969 and entered his first bodybuilding competition within months. The ascent was fast enough to alarm everyone watching. In 1971, at 19, he won the WBBG Pro Mr. America in the teen division. 2 years later, he won the overall IFBB Mr. America title in New York. And weeks after that, he traveled to Geneva, Switzerland to compete in the IFBB Mr. Universe against established champions like Ken Waller and Mike Katz. men who were expected to win, and beat them all. He became the youngest person in history to win that title. His trainer Dan Lurie had been working with him since 1967, when Lou stood at 6 feet 5 and weighed 165 pounds, a skeleton with long bones and nothing yet to show for the ambition behind his eyes. By the time he walked onto the stage in Geneva, he was approaching 270 pounds. That transformation took 6 years in a teenager who had built his first weights from scavenged junk and trained without a proper facility, a proper coach, or any reason to believe the sport would take him seriously. To understand what that meant physically, Arnold Schwarzenegger stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed between 230 and 240 pounds. Lou was 3 inches taller and at peak competition weight between 30 and 45 pounds heavier, with a chest measuring 59 inches compared to Arnold's 57. Muscle Builder magazine described him as supermassive with marble-carved definition, and the bodybuilding press started running articles framing a Schwarzenegger-Ferrigno showdown as inevitable. One publication ran a photoshopped image of Lou holding Arnold's severed head above him with the headline, "Bring me the head of Arnold Schwarzenegger." The press understood exactly what they had: the reigning king and the largest challenger the sport had ever produced, on a collision course audiences had been waiting for since Lou stepped onto his first national stage. Lou had actually seen Arnold compete years before they ever faced each other. In 1969, he sat in the audience at the Mister Olympia contest at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, Arnold's first Olympia, where he finished second to Sergio Oliva. Lou was 17 years old, and instead of feeling intimidated, he saw a tall, big bodybuilder who looked like him, someone he could eventually beat. He went home from that contest and trained harder than ever before. By 1974, Lou had won his second consecutive Mr. Universe title at 22 years old. By almost any objective physical measurement, height, weight, chest size, arm circumference, he was the most imposing bodybuilder on the planet. The first face-to-face confrontation with Arnold Schwarzenegger was 9 days away, and he was walking straight into a mistake he had not made yet, one that had nothing to do with his body and everything to do with his calendar.
And I would like to announce officially that I'm retiring from bodybuilding competition. I would like to thank you all for supporting me. I would like to thank the judges.
The showdown that exposed a flaw. The 1974. Mr. Olympia was held at the Felt Forum at Madison Square Garden, the first time the competition was held in a venue with genuine name recognition. Sports Illustrated sent a reporter. The crowd numbered around 2,000 people, and bodybuilding was starting to believe it could be taken seriously. The contest also introduced weight classes for the first time, dividing competitors into under and over 200 pounds, which meant the Schwarzenegger-Ferrigno confrontation would happen in the over 200 class, uncluttered by anyone else of consequence. Arnold was 27 and had won the previous 4 Mr. Olympia titles. He walked onto the pre-judging stage weighing 237 pounds, a career high, and one reporter from Muscle Builder described watching him hit his double biceps pose as producing stark raving lunacy and hero worship, deep visceral screams from the seats, wave after wave. He was preparing to retire after this show and wanted to go out at the absolute peak of his physical career. By every account from every journalist present that afternoon, he succeeded. Lou arrived, having competed just 6 days earlier at the IFBB Mr. Universe in Verona, Italy, where he dominated and won the overall. 6 days between 2 peak competitions meant his conditioning had been pushed to its tightest point through one show and was already pulling back by the time he stepped onto the second stage. The word that appeared in contemporary press accounts of his condition that night was smooth, and in bodybuilding, smooth means the definition has softened, the water retention has crept back in, and the diamond-hard quality judge's reward has started to blur at the edges. He was still the biggest man anyone in that building had ever seen on a competition stage, but enormous and conditioned are not the same thing, and the judges knew the difference. Arnold won his 5th Mr. Olympia uncontested. Lou finished second, and by the final pose-off, one journalist wrote that he was already looking like a rookie who had made a mistake, a brutal description that the footage confirms. What mattered more than the result was what it revealed about what this rivalry was going to become. Lou had arrived as the physical argument for why Arnold could be beaten. He was bigger, younger, and the most dramatic challenger the sport had ever produced. The question was, what would happen when that physical argument arrived, fully prepared, with no logistical explanation left for why Lou had fallen short? That question was going to be answered. Just not in New York, and not without a camera crew and Arnold Schwarzenegger deciding that retirement could wait one more year. The filmmaker who refused to let Arnold quit, George Butler, was a photographer and filmmaker who had been covering the bodybuilding world since the early 1970s. And in 1974, he and writer Charles Gaines published a book called Pumping Iron, a serious, non-mocking look at professional bodybuilding at a time when most mainstream journalism treated bodybuilders as circus freaks. Butler was convinced the sport had a story worth telling on film, and that Arnold Schwarzenegger was the figure who could carry it to an audience that would otherwise never walk into a bodybuilding venue. The problem was that Arnold had retired. After the 1974 Olympia, he walked away from competition to pursue acting. Had already appeared in 3 films, including Stay Hungry, for which he won a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year, and had every reason to keep moving toward Hollywood. Butler persuaded him anyway, with an argument that boiled down to this: one more competition, filmed and built into a narrative, would give Arnold proof of his dominance at the moment of his own choosing, captured for a mass audience. Arnold agreed and committed to competing in the 1975 Mister Olympia as the centerpiece of Pumping Iron. Lou Ferrigno had not originally planned to compete in 1975 at all. He intended to take the year off, fix the conditioning mistakes that had cost him in 1974, and return in 1976 with a body that could not be denied. It was the Pumping Iron producers who recruited him back because they needed the right rival for Arnold, someone big, credible, and narratively compelling enough to justify the entire structure of the film. Lou was the obvious and only answer, and he agreed to come back, though he later said he regretted not having one more month to prepare before the show. 2 men, 2 worlds, 1 camera. Filming began during the 100 days leading up to the 1975 competitions, with the crew following both men through their training and daily environments. What Butler later confirmed publicly was that reality was giving them 2 men who were physical and temperamental opposites in almost every measurable way. Arnold trained at Gold's Gym in Venice, California, outdoors when possible, surrounded by other bodybuilders, reporters, and photographers, loud, social, and confident to the point of aggression, treating every interaction as an extension of competition. Butler described the contrast directly. Arnold worked out on the beach, outdoors in sunshine, while Louis was in the gym in the shadows. He was the opposite of Arnold. Lou trained in a quieter, more contained environment, more internally focused in the way that people who grew up managing a disability that separated them from casual social interaction often are. The film framed this as Lou training in a dark Brooklyn basement gym with his father as his coach, an image that became iconic. But Lou later admitted that his father had not actually been his training partner as the film suggested, and that their relationship at that time was, in his own words, a love-hate dynamic. The filmmakers constructed the basement setting and isolation to produce visual contrast with Arnold's open, sun-drenched world, something Butler and his team have never denied. What was not staged was the psychological campaign Arnold ran against Lou in the months leading up to the contest. Arnold has since confirmed in interviews, including a Tim Ferriss podcast conversation, that he understood psychological manipulation as a deliberate competitive tool from early in his career, tracing it to his time working as a gym trainer, where he watched people standing in front of mirrors analyzing their own bodies for hours. He understood that a person deeply invested in something physical and personal has a specific vulnerability, and he exploited it. With Lou, the strategy was threefold. Befriending that kept Lou's defenses lower than they would have been against an openly hostile opponent. subtle diminishment through small comments framed as concern or humor that carried embedded messages about Lou's chances, and direct psychological attack at the most critical moment. The day before the 1975 Mr. Olympia, Arnold had breakfast with Lou and his parents, sat at their table, spoke warmly, and then told them he had already called his own mother to inform her he had won his 6th Mr. Olympia.
Mind the thing about it. I called my mother yesterday already and I said I won.
The show had not happened yet. Lou's father appeared visibly deflated. Lou later said he thought Arnold was targeting his father more than him, but the father was the coach, and a coach's belief is the competitor's oxygen. Arnold had cut off the supply before the fight even started. Both men understood something the pumping iron audience never fully grasped. The war was already won or lost before anyone stepped onto the stage. The night everything changed. The 1975 Mr. Olympia was held in Pretoria, South Africa between November 4 and 11 with total prize money of $2,500. This number puts the financial stakes of competitive bodybuilding in that era in clear perspective. These men were not competing for money. They were competing for the title and the historical record. The over 200-pound class contained exactly 3 competitors: Arnold Schwarzenegger of Austria, Serge Nubret of France, and Lou Ferrigno of the United States. Nubret is a name largely forgotten by casual fans. Still, he was one of the most aesthetically elegant bodybuilders of the golden era, lean, proportionate, with extraordinary abdominal definition and a genuinely captivating stage presence. He was also the man who, in the actual scoring, separated Lou from second place. That detail is routinely overlooked because pumping iron framed the competition as a 2-man race, but the scorecards show a 3-man contest in which Lou came third. Nubret finished 13 points behind Arnold. Ferrigno finished 18 points behind. Lou was not just behind Arnold, he was also behind Serge Nubret. Lou has acknowledged this himself. Coming back to the pumping iron producer's timeline meant compressing his preparation into a window shorter than what he needed. By multiple contemporary accounts, he was competing too big, carrying more mass than his conditioning could match at the point of the show. In 1974, his mistake had been coming in too smooth. In 1975, the mistake was similar in category. The mass was extraordinary, but the definition that would have turned that mass into a title argument was not fully realized. He later admitted he regretted not having one more month of preparation. He knew exactly where the gap was and how large it was. Set that against what the stage actually looked like. At 6'5" and approximately 270 pounds, Lou was the largest man in the building. Arnold was competing at a leaner weight than his 1974 career high, having dialed down to prioritize condition over size, and photos from the pre-judging show 2 men who look like they belong in entirely different weight classes, despite competing in the same one. The contrast was so stark that audience members who had never attended a bodybuilding contest immediately understood that something historic was standing before them, and yet the scoring did not reflect that visual dominance. Because bodybuilding judges do not score a man's appearance as he walks through a door. They score high in symmetry, condition, and the ability to present a physique that makes its strengths impossible to ignore and its weaknesses difficult to find. That is a skill that has to be learned, and the learning takes years of competition at the highest level. What Arnold had that Lou did not, and what the score reflects, was posing as a complete competitive discipline. He had been doing this for over a decade. He understood how to compress time on stage, how to move between poses quickly enough that the judges saw momentum rather than transition, and how to sequence his routine to land on his strongest pose at the exact moment the judges were making their final assessments. He knew that the human eye forgives a lot when it is moving, and that confidence on stage reads as conviction in the judging box. In the final round, where all competitors go head-to-head choosing their own poses, Arnold's experience was decisive. He was faster, more precise, and composed enough to enjoy it. Lou was larger but less fluent, and the size that should have been his winning argument needed to be packaged in a way he had not had long enough to fully master. Backstage, before the final appearances, Arnold admonished Lou for making too much noise while pumping up in the warm-up area, a small act of control reinforcing who commanded the energy in the room. When placements were announced, Arnold leaned over and whispered something into Lou's ear before Lou's name was called for third place. Nobody present confirmed what he said, and Lou has never repeated it publicly. His response, captured on film, was simply, "I'm going to lose. Arnold, you're the best." Arnold won his 6th consecutive Mr. Olympia and announced his retirement from professional bodybuilding immediately after. He had gone out exactly as planned, at his peak on film, with the world watching. The overall decision, which combined all weight classes, was decided by a 4-3 judge vote over Franco Columbu, the closest an overall had ever been, though that detail gets almost no attention because Pumping Iron was not built around that story. The film was released in January 1977, 2 years after the competition it documented, and went on to earn a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. It introduced bodybuilding to an audience that had previously shown no interest in the sport and made Arnold a household name before Conan, before The Terminator, and before any of the films that made him the biggest box office draw in the world. And it made the audience love Lou Ferrigno, not because he won, but because he didn't. The camera chose the loser. When Pumping Iron was released, critics noticed something the bodybuilding press had missed entirely. The most compelling figure in the film was not the winner. Directors George Butler and Robert Fiore have been open about building a narrative with specific roles assigned to specific people. Arnold as the charismatic, calculating champion, Lou as the vulnerable underdog, and the competition as the plot. They staged scenes to serve that structure, cast participants in roles that suited it, and cut the film to maximize the emotional contrast between the two men. What they did not anticipate, or perhaps understood completely and allowed to happen, was that Lou's portrayal resonated with audiences in a way Arnold's did not. Arnold was fascinating and magnetic, but you admired him from a distance, the way you admire something too polished and too controlled to fully connect with. Lou was someone you recognized, a person carrying a weight he had not chosen, competing against a man who seemed born with every advantage, trying his hardest and coming up short in the way people come up short in real life. The audience saw themselves in him. That response had immediate consequences. Within months of the film's release, Lou was cast in a role that would define the rest of his public life, remarkably the same role he had been dreaming about since he was a bullied child in Brooklyn reading comic books. The Incredible Hulk was being developed for CBS television, and the role had originally been given to Richard Kiel, who stood 7 feet tall and was best known for playing Jaws in the James Bond films. Production had actually begun with Kiel in costume when a director brought his son to the set. The child looked at Kiel in the Hulk makeup and said, "Dad, this is not the Incredible Hulk. He doesn't look anything like the character." Production was immediately halted, and a nationwide search began. They found Lou. He beat out hundreds of California bodybuilders, including Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was among those considered for the role, and signed with Universal Studios in 1977. He had been training for the 1977 Mister Olympia. He chose the Hulk over it, and he has since said it was the right call. Lou wore the costume for 5 seasons from 1977 to 1981, across 82 episodes and 3 television films, with the show drawing household ratings in the 20s at its peak. The makeup required 3.5 to 4 hours every single day. The contact lenses could only be tolerated for 15 minutes at a time, and his toenails stayed green for 6 months after filming was completed. He worked 12 to 14-hour days, managing it all while relying on written scripts and visual cues because his hearing loss made it impossible to process what was being said on a busy film set. Most people would not have been able to sustain that physically, let alone both physically and psychologically. Lou did it for 5 years. Bill Bixby, who played Dr. David Banner, became one of the closest relationships of Lou's professional life. The show's structure kept them apart on screen. Bixby was the rational, restrained human. Ferrigno was the wordless physical force. But offset, they were close. And Lou has described Bixby as a mentor and a father figure using those specific words, which carries particular weight given who his actual father was. The parallel lives Arnold and Lou lived through the late 1970s and 1980s created a cultural symmetry that kept their names tethered long after they stopped competing. Both were bodybuilders who pivoted to entertainment and became iconic on their own terms. Arnold as the Terminator, Lou as the Hulk, both characters with physical impossibilities made flesh by men who had built bodies the camera could not look away from. The difference was that Arnold's roles required him to speak. Lou's most famous role required him only to be present. The question that haunts every discussion of their rivalry is what would have happened if Lou had stayed. The men who won the 1977, 1978, and 1979 Olympia titles, the years Arnold was absent from the stage, were smaller, more aesthetic competitors. Frank Zane won all three at a competition weight of around 185 pounds. Lou weighed between 268 and 285 and was the largest man in the sport's history to that point. The judges who scored those years had never seen anything like Lou's mass combined with real conditioning, and the sport had no framework for evaluating it. That question, how the scoring would have landed and which way the judges would, is the unanswerable one at the center of this entire story. And the sport never got to find out because Lou chose green paint and a CBS contract instead. Arnold retired undefeated. Lou became a cultural phenomenon by losing. The sport got the documentary it needed to survive in the mainstream. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a kid from Brooklyn who built barbells out of cement and broomsticks ended up permanently inside the mythology of both bodybuilding and comic book history. There is also the question of what Lou actually proved, even in defeat. He walked into the 1974 Olympia 6 days out from another major show, came in off his peak, and still finished second to a man who had been perfecting his craft for years. He walked into the 1975 Olympia on a compressed timeline he never fully controlled, with a peak he couldn't quite hit, and still made the stage close enough that the film built around it became a classic. He did this while managing a disability that most people would have used as a reason not to compete at all. The numbers that defined his career deserve to be held up for a moment. From 13 years old, threading a broomstick through cement-filled paint cans on the floor of a Brooklyn apartment, to 23 years old, standing on the most famous bodybuilding stage in the world as the most physically imposing challenger the sport had ever produced. That was 10 years ago, a decade. And within that decade, he won 2 IFBB Mr. Universe titles, 1 IFBB Mr. America overall. He competed twice in the Mr. Olympia against a man who is still considered the greatest of all time. The framing history applied to Lou is that he was the one who almost beat Arnold. That framing undersells it. Lou didn't just come close on paper. He forced a 6-time champion to engineer a breakfast conversation to gain a psychological edge, and he forced a man who had already won 5 consecutive Olympia titles to fly halfway around the world for a documentary specifically designed to document his legacy at its peak. Arnold needed Lou to be the threat that made the victory mean something. Without Lou, there was no story. And Lou was exactly that threat. He was not supposed to become what he became. He became it anyway. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.